mean, the reality is clinicians are a little bit putting their license at risk anytime they're stepping into a gray area. It's important for people who are coming from a business or tech side to understand that your license is the most important thing you have as a clinician. Without that, you can't practice. Your livelihood is gone.
Welcome to Secret Ops, the podcast uncovering the world of operations one episode at a time. I'm your host, Ariana Cafone, and today's guest is Dr. Hannah Weisman, clinical psychologist and seasoned healthcare startup operator. Now, I have pursued Hannah for years to have this interview because I've not met many people that have fused clinical psychology and operations. So in this episode, we discuss what that looks like in action, also some takeaways that we as operators can bring into our own work. And just straight up, she made me reframe operations in a completely new way. Hannah, I have been wanting to have you as a guest on Secret Ops for ages because you have this beautiful fusion of clinical psychology and operations. How did that come to be? I don't think I've ever met anybody with that background. So where did that come from, and why did those worlds make sense to you to fuse?
Yeah, great question. I stumbled into it a little bit. So I was doing my clinical training postdoc in San Francisco in the Bay Area and was trying to figure out what I wanted to do after that. And, when in Rome, I had a good friend who worked at a health tech startup and said, hey, we're hiring for a position. Would you be interested? And so I decided to try it out, and I ended up working, I think when I started they were Series A, and I worked there for about 3 years through their Series C. And during that time, pretty quickly realized that the things that I was gravitating toward, that I was excelling at, that I was enjoying the most were the more operational components. So using my clinical background and knowledge, but then applying that to figure out how do we turn this into workflows? How do we document what we're doing here? How do we start to scale it? How do we, maintain the clinical quality as we're growing these services? And so I started working more and more under our chief operations officer and kind of realized I was getting like a mini MBA on the job and just really leaned into that. And so I even did an executive education program focusing on the more operational and business components, things that I was learning on the job, but wanted a more solid background in. And so just that kind of became my niche, was this bridge between clinical and business operations. And I found I really, really enjoyed that.
I'm beaming because every operator I've stumbled upon typically doesn't say, hey, I knew I always wanted to do operations. It's something that you realize your brain is really happy doing that. Yeah. And then usually there's a real creative side that you fuse with that, at least that I found. And I feel like clinical psychology, obviously very medical based, but it's also quite creative. You're dealing with humans, which are, we're wildly wonderful messes. So how does this manifest in your day-to-day?
Yeah, so that has shifted over time. For many years when I was working, I worked in kind of seed stage through Series C startups. And when I was in those roles, my operations kind of ranged from very early stage, figuring out what are we even offering? What are we doing? Who do we need to hire? What are the workflows? How do you get someone from intake through actually accessing a service? And so early on, it was that kind of stuff. But then as we would start to grow, a lot of my role became more about capacity planning. Have we hired enough? How do we make sure we have enough demand? And then planning for expanding into new markets, new states. Healthcare is a highly regulated industry. And so that was a real cross-functional effort to figure out what are all of the different pieces that we needed, from legal to marketing to, hiring, to make sure that we had a successful launch. And then also partnering with our product team. So this is where I really got to bridge my clinical brain with the business and the product, is figuring out what do we need to prioritize in building these services. And obviously I was working with amazing product people who had their own ideas and understanding of what was going on the back end and what needed to be built. But then I could offer from a clinical perspective and help them prioritize that roadmap and make sure we were building the things that our customers really wanted and that our clinicians really needed to be able to offer the services we wanted to offer. So that was a long time what I was doing. I will say more recently, within the past year, I have shifted gears. I'm now doing a little bit more. I've always had a small private practice on the side. I just didn't want to lose that clinician part of myself. But now I'm doing about a half-time private practice, and then I'm still doing more advisory and consulting with startups, helping with some of these operational things. And then also just, I mean, it's such an exciting time with AI and healthcare. And so talking through a lot of the questions about clinical product and how do you roll these things out or test them safely and really make sure that they're effective.
Now, because of the speed with which things are moving, and the regulation that you're navigating, I can assume there's a crazy bottleneck that you're trying to figure out from a clinical psychology standpoint, but also an operational standpoint, because you can only move so fast, but we need to move faster. How do you remedy those two conflicting things, or are they not conflicting? Do you think there's a harmony there? What's your thoughts?
God, it's probably a both and, you know, like those
Yeah.
regulations exist for a reason. And, you know, there needs to be a lot of regulation in order to make sure that the healthcare industry is safe and that we're not doing things, particularly within mental health, where we're putting people's lives at risk. And so I definitely try not to hate on the regulations that exist. And you're right, like it does make things really hard sometimes, and particularly when, you know, we were expanding into new states. I mean, some states have really wild timelines for launch. Like you need to be planning 6+ months ahead of time and, you know, getting all of the legal pieces in place to have a professional corporation and get all your paperwork filed and wait several months for the state to approve it. I mean, it could take a really long time. And one of the biggest challenges, to your point about healthcare, is that it is state by state. And so you can't make assumptions that what worked or like a timeline in one state is going to apply to another state. And that also presented a huge difficulty with capacity planning because on both sides, supply and demand, we found very different things in terms of how many clinicians were available in these various states, how many clinicians were licensed, and how much demand there was for mental health services, and what type of demand. Like in some states, there's a huge demand from more rural populations because they just really don't have access. And in other states, it's like you're really focusing on the urban areas, and that's where people are really have a high demand for mental health services. So it just, you have to like learn each market, and that takes time.
Does that is the It's the interesting and also infuriating thing about the United States and doing it on a state by state level. There's all these complexities, takes time, but it also allows room for innovation, which is the exciting part, and I'm sure quite a motivating part of what you do for people who are not operators like us, who just are individuals in the healthcare space. What are some of the most exciting innovations you've seen to help service individuals in the clinical psychology space or just in the healthcare space in general?
Obviously, right now, there's so much hype around AI within every industry, and that includes healthcare. And there is a lot of potential there that I'm very excited about. And I think that is truly potential at this point to
Mm.
offer like very personalized, culturally informed, responsive, like evidence-based mental health care. Like that all sounds amazing. And I'm not confident that we're there yet. So that's something I'm like keeping an eye on before I'm ready to like jump and recommend that people use some of those. Like at this point, I'm like, please don't use ChatGPT for mental health services, you know, like that
Yeah.
has real potential to cause harm. But I do think there are groups of people who are thinking so ethically about how do we leverage Gen AI to really bring mental health care to more people and make it accessible. So that's something I'm excited about. I think another trend in the industry right now, and this has really been happening over the past year, during the pandemic, there was so much excitement within the mental health space that every company was basically getting pressured to expand nationally as soon as possible.
Mm.
And I think one shift that we've seen is that even some of those companies have pulled back and decided to focus on specific geographic regions or specific markets because healthcare is local and what people need is based in the context of where they live and what resources they have and what is the culture of that place. And so I know this doesn't sound like innovation, but I'm really excited about some of the companies that are bridging in-person brick and mortar services, but then also bringing technology into that in a way that helps people get access to care faster, have a higher level of quality, get their questions answered. And so I'm very excited about the companies that are pursuing that hybrid model and really seeing how we can best serve local communities.
It seems to me to be a wicked problem that if you can crack it, it will create like almost a new generation of healthcare.
Yeah.
It really it just redefine how we approach and how we talk to people and how we serve people within the context of where they live. I moved from New York back to the Midwest to be closer to my parents, and I will even just say East Coast, Midwest, so different in how we talk about things, how we approach things, how we communicate. Like, for example, my therapist was in Louisiana, and that was
Right.
interesting too. She's approaching it from a completely different angle that actually
Right.
served me quite well
Yeah.
with that East Coast mentality. So there's these advantages of looking local, but also the advantages of talking to people in different areas that can sort of disrupt your thinking in a way that maybe someone in New York couldn't have done because we're on that same energy level. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
It
Sounds
does. And
crazy
actually, I
hippie.
think what you're getting at is such an interesting thing where when we talk about, personalized mental health care, the assumption is often that what that means is finding a clinician who matches as many factors as possible with the client or the patient. But that's not necessarily true. And I think we have a lot more learning, and we're finally, some of these companies are getting enough data to really start to look at what actually is the most helpful when you're matching a clinician and a client, and how do you make sure that people are getting matched on the right factors that are actually going to set them up for success, and not making assumptions about what those factors might be.
Fascinating. It makes sense because like is not like and like doesn't always really jive, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
you need to have that person that's going to come in and completely change your train of thought. So fascinating. That opens up another layer of complexity.
Yeah. Well, and just to acknowledge within that, one layer of complexity is that, like, we're humans. We can't have a predictive model that's 100% accurate. And so
Mm.
even within these systems that are trying their best to do some predictive modeling and say, like, who should we connect, you have to, within healthcare, allow for the human element and say, well, they might not be the right fit. And usually if I'm just telling a friend who's looking for a therapist, I'll say, if by the third session, if you're not feeling like there's a good fit there, go find a new therapist. And we need to allow for that within the other solutions that we're developing, and acknowledge that no matter how good of predictive analytics we're trying to do, it's never going to be perfect.
Well, this beautifully gets into your role within companies or in advising companies where you straddle practitioners, technology teams, you're in healthcare and business operations. You're in this sort of a traffic controller, for lack of a better word. Can you just talk us through the importance of that and what you've learned on the ground? What has that looked like in real time?
You're getting at what I think is one of, like, the central challenges of health tech as a field, which is that if you just look at the values of the field of healthcare and clinicians who are trained within traditional healthcare, and then you look at the values of people who get their MBA and work within business, very traditional tech career, those are two very different sets of values. And a lot of my role in kind of being within clinical operations was basically helping bridge those two groups. And so helping people with that business or tech background understand clinicians and why they're getting up in arms about something that maybe people are like, why is this a big deal? Like, what do you, this is, this is normal, or et cetera. And vice versa, helping clinicians understand, what does it mean to build a sustainable business? Why are some decisions being made that, maybe we are trying something innovative and it is pushing the boundaries a little bit of the, like, traditional ethics in our field. and really talking that through with people and giving them the space to think it through for themselves and kind of give their input, and making sure their input then is really heard and taken back to the people who are on the business side. So it was a lot of back and forth, and that was something I enjoyed. I learned so much from the people who had this more traditional business or tech background, and I hope that they feel the same, that like it was a real exchange of information and knowledge and values, and trying to bridge those two things together, which is just never easy within this industry, especially when you're venture backed and you start to get more and more pressure to grow exponentially. It's hard to maintain that sense of both sides being very valued. But I think the most successful companies are continually striving for that.
You said a word that struck my brain differently, which is the ethics of what you're doing. When I'm with the company, we talk about company values, mission, dot, 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 dot. You're dealing with ethics on a medical standpoint,
Yeah.
where you've made this oath to behave in a certain way, and then as technology is pushing those boundaries, you have that tension. That dissonance to me would seem incredibly difficult to find a progressive way forward on. What did you find to be the best strategy?
A lot of translation. I think you're absolutely correct. Of like, what words can I use that will more resonate with either side? And so
Yeah.
there was that translation component. And also recognizing that like not every clinician is a good fit to work in health tech, because health tech is inherently trying to innovate and trying to bring new ideas to the space, which means, like, an example, I worked at a company where we were providing online group support, and we were really differentiating that from group therapy. Now that's a hard thing. Like, if it's group support and it's not like a service that requires a license, in theory you can provide that across state lines, which is obviously more scalable.
Like a
um,
support group, like
right,
in the
like a
more
support
traditional
group.
sense. Got
Yes,
it.
versus like a therapy group. Now, I know this is like getting really down into the lingo, but this stuff very deeply matters. And when we would consult with legal teams, the basic answer is this is a gray area. And the reality is clinicians are a little bit putting their license at risk anytime they're stepping into a gray area. And so it's important for people who are coming from a business or tech side to understand that, and understand like your license is the most important thing you have as a clinician. Without that, you can't practice. Your livelihood is gone. So,
Absolutely.
um, so really helping them understand why are clinicians maybe having really strong reactions, and how do we then think through that in a way that protects their license and really shows that we've done our due diligence to think through the ethics of this. And so I really had the pleasure of working with some leadership teams that were so open to that and to understanding and to learning, but then also vice versa. There was a lot of helping clinical teams understand, and this also just as you're scaling, right? It is hard to do good communication about why decisions are getting made as you're growing quickly and things are changing constantly. It was a constant battle to make sure that the clinical team, the people who are providing the service that you're offering to your customers, are actually understanding why are things changing, or why is this being done this way, why have we changed this or removed this service. And so so much of clinical operations is also just making sure that communication is happening well as you're scaling, and it's happening in the language and the jargon that these teams can understand.
The why is so much more important than people really understand in operations. I'm working with a founder right now, and he's like, you're constantly showing and kind of over explaining. And I totally take that feedback too, and think, okay, how can I scale back my words? But part of the over explaining is because you need people to buy into what's happening and understand what's happening. And not everybody communicates or understands in the same way. So some people are visual, some people are, audible, some people need to have that conversation. But that I found as an operator is the biggest part of my job, trying to get to the why and get people to get there.
1,000%. The why is so central to bringing people along. But then I think also just respecting that some people aren't going to agree with the why. And then like that's okay. And then you're having a discussion around like, is this still a good fit? Are we aligned? If we're not aligned, like what are the next steps? Just acknowledging that when you're pushing the limits of what's traditionally been done, not everybody is going to want to go along. Or you might go along and then realize, well, that was a bad idea, and hopefully you're not realizing that in a way that, has caused harm. But, like just leaving room for the fact that it's okay if not everybody comes along, but then you just have to be open about that and really address it and figure out what to do about it.
That's a beautiful point. It's the same with working for startups. So I focus on small to mid-sized businesses, early days. It is not an environment for everybody. And
Right.
sometimes it's not, this person is great. It's just not the right environment for them to thrive. Like it just doesn't, there's too much change. They don't really understand why there's so much change. They need different things in the environment. And having that conversation early and often, I've learned, I have tried to change people. As we all know, that never works. They have to want to change, or they don't have to change. They just need to find an environment that jives with them better. In operation, when I say I'm an operator, people immediately think process and technology. Very rarely are they thinking about the people component. The best operators I've met are people first. They're great communicators, they're incredible translators, and the technology and the process are vessels to do their work. Now, I feel like for you, that's like on steroids, right? Like you're taking that on like a different level. For me, I've had to figure out how to not blur the lines, right? I'm helping people and I'm working with people, but at some point, I have to separate myself and they've got to do what's best for them, vice versa. So how do you help people learn the Jedi mind trick that you have learned in the years to be able to relate and communicate and translate, but not get dragged into that?
Just to be transparent, like even though I do have a clinical background, this is not something I've always excelled at. And there were a lot of like tough times where I had to get a lot of feedback about the way I was presenting something or talking about something. And so it's almost funny because being a clinician, I actually don't always think to apply my clinical skills. So I just, got to acknowledge that like that is just hard for everyone. And it's hard also when you're feeling the pressure to grow and to get things done and to just like bring people, you got to get on board because we're doing this. It is hard to pull back and leave space for people. Like the best kind of metaphor I've heard is that when you're in the middle of making decisions, particularly operational decisions or product decisions, you're like at the center of the hurricane and you're in the eye of the storm and you know everything that's going on. And it almost feels calm because you see everything that's about to happen. But as you get further out from that vantage point, you get people who are being whipped around, and they don't have that visibility and that calm. And they're like, we're doing what? Like last week we were doing this and now we're doing this. And like, why is this changing? And so just holding on to the empathy and the understanding that like as much as possible, you're wanting to bring those people toward your same spot where they have the visibility, the understanding, the time to process that you've had. And I think that's one thing we often forget is that by the time you're communicating out some of these decisions, these operational changes, you've had time to process it and you know the why and like you've been brought along basically. But in that moment, it's the first time people are hearing about it. And so you have to allow them the space to have the same process and to come along and to get to that calm place.
You blew my mind. Like you seriously, I have chills right now. When people ask with operations, hey, do you want to be on this email? Hey, do you want to be on this thing? I'm like, just put me on it. Not because I feel like I want to micromanage things, but just for visibility. And it's for the exact thing that you said. When you can be in the eye of the storm, you can see all of the things that are circling, and we as operators can see the dominoes. But when you're not in that knowledgeable, you're getting whipped around. And as an operator, if you're getting whipped around, things break. Like bad things happen. You've articulated something that I've always felt but never knew how to communicate, which is brilliant. I'm going to steal that.
Please do. And I
Yoink.
think I might have stolen that from someone. I'm like thinking it might have been one of the COOs I worked under. So if it was, credit to that person, but I'm not sure.
No, it really is such a reflection of what operations is. We're the all knowing, but for the reason of helping everyone come along into that. Hannah, I got to get to know a little bit more about you as a human. First question is, what is your favorite part of the day?
I'm going to go with my evenings. I've got like a pretty solid wind down routine that involves pajamas, reading, putting my phone away, like real relaxation vibes. And that's just become a delightful way to end my day.
What book or audiobook or podcast are you currently listening to?
I'm currently reading Hamnet for my book club. So far, so good.
Is there a favorite quote that you have or something that has stuck out to you over the years that you've taken with you?
One of the things that really led me to make a career shift, and I'm not going to quote this directly, but I'll give the gist of it. There was an episode of the How to Be a Better Human podcast. The host had on Sandy Allen, who's this amazing trans activist who also has done some mental health advocacy. And in sharing his story, said something along the lines of, are the people who are revolutionizing mental health care actually living mentally healthy lives themselves? And I remember hearing that and just kind of feeling like it was like a punch to my gut. Like, no, I'm not. I'm a workaholic. I'm like really invested in startup life. It's stressful. And that was the moment I really started thinking about something's got to shift. I'm not somehow living a life that feels like it's supporting my own mental health. And so started making some changes.
I've gotten so many chills in this conversation, earnestly. That's when I've got to look at internally with myself too. What is something that makes you little kid happy? Just brings you all the joy?
Oh my gosh. This is a controversial one, but in a few weeks, it's going to be Seafair here in Seattle, and the Blue Angels are going to be here. And I know that it's air pollution, all kinds of problems. I just love them. I don't know. It's nostalgia. It's everything. It makes me feel like a little kid. Love the Blue Angels.
We'll stop with this one, which is, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I think what I would say now, and this has been evolving, is I want to be someone who can say authentically that I'm living a mentally healthy life and I'm helping other people do that too. I hope I'm doing that on a one-on-one level with my clients, and then I hope I'm doing that on a larger scale through my work within the health tech scene. So that's the goal.
Hannah, you are such a joy. If people are listening and they're smiling as big as I'm smiling right now, where can they find you and see what you're up to?
Probably LinkedIn is going to be the best place to connect with me. I go off and on of how much I'm posting, but try to put some thoughts on there somewhat frequently. So would love to connect with people on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again for your time and your expertise. I have found this incredibly fascinating, and I'm sure others have too. Secret Ops listeners, thank you so much for listening to Secret Ops. As always, please subscribe, share the joy, watch us on YouTube, and we will see you next time.